He married without even inviting me to speak. So I didn't mention the 7 million. His father left me, and I never will. He didn't mention me. Not once. Not in the vows, not in the speeches, not even when he raised his glass to those who made this day possible. I sat at the back table, near the catering station, with a paper placecard that said, Edith, in small cursive, no title, no relation. His first-grade teacher got a better seat. The wedding was beautiful in the way money can make things beautiful. Pale linen tents, a string quartet, champagne so dry it hurt the tongue. Everything staged to the inch, including where they put me. Far enough to smile politely, close enough to not ruin the photographs. I wore the dress he said made me look tired at Easter. I wore it anyway. They walked down the aisle under an arch of white roses. The photographer clicked like a metronome. Everyone rose. I rose, too. Everyone wept. I did not. They kissed. They laughed. They fed each other cake with forks plated in gold. Then came the speeches. His college roommate, her sister, even the man who manages their portfolio. I waited. The DJ tapped the mic. Anyone else? No one looked my way, not even Mark. I'd practiced. 2 minutes. A small story about how he once brought me a bouquet of dandelions at 5 years old and called it a man's flowers. I wanted to say, you've always known how to give what you think matters. I hope you still do. But it wasn't needed. So I folded the paper in half, then again, then into quarters, then tucked it into my purse beside a crumpled tissue and a peppermint. No one noticed. Later, as they danced, I stood near the heaters and sipped mineral water. A server passed with a tray of truffles. I declined. She looked surprised. She must have thought I was just some old aunt with a forgotten name. She wasn't wrong. When the music swelled and Mark dipped his new wife so deep her heel scraped the grass, I felt something in my chest. Not pain, not even disappointment. Just a shift, like a picture frame finally straightening on its own. No anger, no tears, only clarity. I smiled. For the first time that day, I smiled. Because what Mark didn't know, what no one at that wedding knew, was that his father had left me $7 million. Quietly. Purposefully. A gift of love and a kind of apology, written in a lawyer's ink. And I had never told anyone, not out of spite, not even to protect it, just because I hadn't felt like saying it. But that night, as I walked alone to the parking lot, clutching my little handbag and listening to the DJ yell for the last dance, I decided something. I would never tell him. Not because he didn't deserve it, though he didn't. Not because he'd hurt me, though he had, but because he had shown me exactly who I was to him. A shadow in the background, a name on a card, a woman who'd already had her time. And that's fine. Let him think I'm old and harmless. Let him believe I went home and cried. Let him think I'm just his mother. He'll never know he married under the silent blessing of $7 million he'll never touch. And I will never say a word. It started with the door. Not slamming, not even closing loudly. Just a quiet click behind me one afternoon when I came in from the market and found that the hallway closet, once mine, had been emptied. My coat shoved to the side, my boots in a plastic bin labelled Misk. I stood there, still holding the grocery bag. No one said anything. The next morning, the shelf with my cookbooks was gone. "We're simplifying," his wife said. "Too many things around makes the place feel cramped." She smiled like it was a compliment. So I began moving my things. Not because I was asked. Not even because I wanted to. But because it was easier than watching them disappear without my consent. Mark didn't notice. Or pretended not to. He had other things now. A new house, a promotion, a woman who pressed her hand lightly on his forearm when she wanted him to stop talking. They called it the in-law suite, a finished basement with its own entrance. "You'll have your own space," she said, handing me the key like a favor. It was fine. Clean. Quiet. Beige walls and a small kitchenette that always smelled faintly of dust. The windows were narrow and high, as if the sky itself was reluctant to look in. I moved in with my knitting basket, a photograph of Greg from 1989, and a kettle. No one helped. I didn't ask. I boiled water for tea and sat on the little sofa they'd ordered from an online catalogue. It creaked under me, but I didn't mind. I'd sat on harder things. Sometimes I came upstairs to help with dinner. Sometimes I didn't. Once, I set the table, and she moved the forks. "We don't do it that way anymore," she said gently. Always gently. I nodded. The small things piled up. She replaced my tea with a brand she said was healthier. My pillow disappeared after laundry day. My favorite mug was chipped and never replaced. It wasn't cruelty. That's the thing. Cruelty you can confront. This was erosion. Every day, a little less space, a little less voice, a little more reminder that I was here by allowance. At dinner, I became the extra plate. At breakfast, I was already gone. Mark would say things like, "She likes it quiet," when I stayed in the basement, and his wife would nod, not even pretending to ask me directly. I liked it quiet, yes, but not invisible. I learned not to make requests. I learned to knock before entering my own son's kitchen. I learned that silence takes many forms. And still, I stayed. Not because I was afraid, not because I didn't have options, but because something in me wanted to believe that this was what aging looked like, that stepping back meant love. Greg had died 6 years earlier. Cancer. Quick. Unforgiving. He left me with tears, papers, and a note in his careful handwriting. "Don't let them talk over you." I kept it folded inside a book of his. At night, I'd sit in the dim glow of the basement lamp and trace those words with my finger. Don't let them talk over you. But who listens to women like me? Women who no longer raise children, who no longer wear heels, who speak softly because it's the only tone left that doesn't make people wince. I once ran a library. I once built a whole life out of coupons and casseroles. I once sat on the floor with Mark after his first heartbreak and said nothing, just held his shaking shoulders while he wept. Now he didn't even knock before walking past me. Sometimes I'd hear them talking upstairs, laughing, planning, living, and I'd feel like a visitor in a house I helped build. No one asked me what I wanted. No one wondered if I was happy. Because I was still useful, quiet, neat, undemanding. And that, in their eyes, was enough. But usefulness isn't love. It's function. And function can be replaced. One evening, I overheard them discussing renovations. She said, "If we ever do convert the basement, maybe we can move her to assisted living. Somewhere with people her age?" He didn't argue. He just said, "We'll see." I made tea that night in silence, crushed a mint leaf between my fingers and let the scent rise. And I remembered. 7 million, tucked away, legally mine, untouched, unspoken, waiting. Not for revenge, not for drama, just readiness. Because they thought I had nowhere to go, but I did. She said it while slicing sweet potatoes, just loud enough for the words to cut through the sound of the knife on the board. She eats, but doesn't help. I was 2 feet away, rinsing dishes. The sink was running, but I heard her perfectly. The knife kept moving. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Mark said nothing, not a word. He stood there beside her, checking something on his phone, nodding along to music only he could hear. My son, my only child. And I stood there, holding a dripping plate in my hand like a fool. The water ran warm over my fingers. I turned it off gently, dried my hands on a towel, said nothing. That's how you survive moments like that. Not by exploding, not by crying, by continuing. Their son, my grandson, looked up from his tablet at the kitchen island. He didn't understand all of it, but enough to know something had shifted in the air. He didn't smile when I passed by. Children sense these things before they can name them. I went downstairs, sat on the small bed, folded laundry that didn't need folding, smoothed the sheets like it mattered. My hands shook once, just once, before I placed them calmly in my lap. I didn't cry. Crying is for people who believe someone might ask why. They didn't. The next morning, I brewed coffee before anyone else woke up, left a small plate of toast beside the pot, tidied the living room, placed a clean towel in their bathroom. They didn't notice, or if they did, they didn't speak of it. She said it again 2 days later, this time to her sister on the phone. She's not a guest. She's just there. You know? Like wallpaper. I was upstairs looking for a charger. I froze on the stairs, heard my name mentioned once, then never again. I left the charger, went back to the basement. The same lamp. The same smell of detergent and cold tile. The same 2 pairs of shoes lined up neatly near the door. I opened my notebook. Not the financial one. Not yet. The other one. The one with Greg's handwriting on the first page. For the things we never want to forget. I wrote the date, the time, the words she said. She eats but doesn't help. I underlined it once. I didn't write anything else. That night, Mark came downstairs, brought me a small bowl of pasta. "Hey, dinner?" he said. Smiled like everything was fine. I took it, thanked him, ate it quietly. It was overcooked. He asked if I needed anything. I said no. Then he said, "You know she's just stressed. Work's been a lot." I smiled. Of course. Because that's what I'm meant to do. Absorb. Excuse. Nod. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake and stared at the ceiling. The fan above clicked every few seconds like a metronome for a life I no longer conducted. My knees ached. My back was tight. My mind, sharp. I thought about the mortgage documents tucked in the fireproof box under my bed, the account Greg had set up, the will that left it all to me, not to Mark, not to the family, to me. 7 million, invested carefully, quietly. Greg's last act of protection. I hadn't touched a dollar. I hadn't needed to, not until now, because something had shifted, not just in them, in me. I had allowed this. I had folded my life into the corners of theirs. I had made myself smaller to make them feel larger. I had traded presence for politeness. And for what? So they could call me wallpaper. So I could sit in basements and be grateful for silence. No, Greg wouldn't have wanted this. I remembered the way he once looked at me 20 years ago when I told him I felt invisible in my own home. He had touched my hand and said, "Then let's rebuild a house where you're seen." We did. Literally. We bought a small cottage by the lake and painted it blue. He died before he could finish renovating it. I sold it after. But I remember the paint, the smell, the way he made space for me. And now? Now I lived in 600 square feet, beneath my son's living room, waiting for scraps of decency like a trained dog. She eats, but doesn't help. Fine. They would never taste another thing made by my hands. They would never know the depth of what I had left unspoken. And one day, very soon, they would learn. I was not living here because I needed them. I was living here because I loved them. And those are not the same. I began to disappear before I even noticed it. It was subtle at first. A missed introduction at a dinner party, a family photo taken without asking me to join, a birthday cake with no candle for me to blow out. They'd smile, they'd say, "You're part of everything." But I wasn't. Not really. My name stopped showing up on invitations. I was just expected. Like a side table or a potted plant. Useful. Silent. Present. When Mark's new wife redid the kitchen, she took down the framed photo of Greg and me from the wall and never put it back. Said it didn't match the new color palette. I found it in a box labeled "Old Frames" in the garage. The glass was cracked. I wrapped it in a towel and took it downstairs. Placed it beside the small lamp in my room. He looked at me from that photo like he always had, with gentle certainty. That's what I held on to. The certainty that I had once been seen. That someone had once looked at me not as a fixture, but as the center. I think that's what disappears first when you're no longer wanted. Not your body, but your reflection. No one looks at you with meaning anymore. One afternoon, I was folding Mark's son's laundry, the smallest shirts, little socks balled up tight, and I found a note tucked in one pocket. Crayon, bright blue. "Grandma lives in the floor." I sat with that for a long time. He hadn't meant harm. He was 4. But it was true, wasn't it? I lived under them, beneath them, below. My meals eaten at different times, my footsteps muffled, my voice filtered through ceilings. I had become something less than living, a convenience. She once told her friend on the phone, "It's not that I don't appreciate her. It's like having a guest that never leaves." I was in the next room. The walls in this house are thin, no matter how thick their insulation. I held my breath until she hung up, and then I made a choice. I stopped baking, stopped tidying the common rooms, stopped stocking their pantry with the brands they liked. She noticed first. "Are we out of those protein bars?" she asked one morning, digging through the cupboard. "I don't know," I said. She blinked. "Oh," I thought. I smiled gently. No apology, no explanation. I let the silence sit between us like a quiet child who'd finally learned how to speak. Mark took longer to notice. He always did. But eventually he mentioned it. "Everything okay?" Of course. He didn't press, because pressing requires presence. And Mark, he'd been absent for years. The last time he asked how I was really doing, Greg was still alive. That thought hit me like a cold wind. I started going out more. Long walks, library visits, a coffee shop near the corner where they played Ella Fitzgerald on Saturdays. I wore lipstick again. Not for anyone. Just to remember. A woman at the cafe asked if I was waiting for someone. "No," I said. "I just like the window seat." She smiled. And in that smile, I felt more seen than I had in months. It's a strange thing, fading. You don't notice until someone asks you a real question. Like, "Do you want cream in that?" Like, "Is this seat taken?" Like, "Are you okay?" They don't ask that in the house. They assume. And maybe that's the greatest insult of all. To be assumed. Assumed content. Assumed grateful. Assumed done. I wasn't done. Not by a long stretch. They treated me like a page that had already been read. But I had chapters left. Not dramatic ones. Not flashy. But real, quiet, certain. And they would never read them, because they didn't know I was still writing. It happened on a Tuesday. No storm. No drama. Just a conversation I wasn't meant to hear. I had come upstairs to return a borrowed baking dish, though I wasn't baking for them anymore. Old habit, I suppose. My steps were quiet, always had been, and the hallway rug muffled even that. They were in the living room. I stopped when I heard my name. She's always there, Mark said, exhaling, his voice low, tired. She is, his wife answered, sharper. Like clutter, emotional clutter, just floating around, taking up energy. I didn't move. My heart didn't race. My hands didn't tremble. I just stood there, holding the dish, my thumb resting on the chip in the rim. She doesn't even notice, she added. She's like a houseplant at this point. Eats, wanders, nods. Mark said nothing, not even then. I backed away without a sound and returned downstairs, set the dish on the counter, sat on the edge of the bed, looked at my palms like they belonged to someone else. That night, I didn't sleep. I watched the shadows move across the ceiling, like slow, silent dancers. I had never thought of myself as clutter, not even in the years when I lost my purpose, when Greg died, when Mark stopped visiting. But now they had given it a name, emotional clutter. They saw me, and still, they spoke that way, which meant they didn't care if I heard, or worse, they hoped I would. The next morning I made oatmeal, enough for one, ate it slowly, watched the steam rise and vanish. I liked that part. The vanishing. Mark came down later. "Everything okay?" he asked again. That same line. I nodded. He didn't notice the change, didn't ask why I hadn't made coffee for him like I always had, didn't ask why the laundry basket sat untouched. I think part of him liked it. The silence. The surrender. But I wasn't surrendering. I was watching. Not them. Me. Me. Pulling further and further from the center until I was no longer in their orbit. Later that week, we had guests. Friends of Mark's from work. The kind who wear crisp shirts and laugh too loud. I offered to help in the kitchen. She declined. "We've got it." So I stayed in my little room until I was called, not by name, just a knock. "Can you bring up that extra pitcher?" she asked. "We forgot the lemonade." I brought it, quietly, set it on the table, started to walk away, and that's when I heard her. "Oh, don't mind her," she said, laughing lightly. "She's just our resident freeloader." The room chuckled, not cruelly, just awkwardly. The kind of laugh that says, "We don't know where to look." I didn't look at anyone. I didn't say a word, just turned and left, back downstairs, back into the space where they thought they'd tucked me away. Freeloader. She had said it like a joke, but jokes only work when they aren't already believed. I stared at my reflection in the small mirror above the sink. Who was I in this house? Not mother, not elder, not guest, not even help. Just tolerated. I thought of Greg, how he used to introduce me. "This is my Edith. She built everything with me." And now I was background noise. And the worst part, the part that burned quietly, was that I had let it happen. I had thanked them for the room, for the food, for the leftover space in their schedule. I had made myself easy to ignore. But that day, after the laughter faded upstairs, I opened the drawer beside my bed, took out the envelope, the one with the deed, the one that still had my name on it, full, legal, uncontested. I laid it flat on the bed and looked at it, and then I looked around the room, at the cracked baseboard, at the small window that barely caught light, at the plastic blinds they never replaced. This wasn't my home. It never had been. But I had one, and I would return to it, not to live in it, but to use it, because they thought I had nowhere to go. And now I needed them to learn that I had only stayed because I chose to, and one day very soon, I would choose differently. He told me on a Wednesday. We were sitting on the porch, late summer, the air still warm enough to make the iced tea sweat in our hands. Greg was already sick then, though we didn't say the word out loud. Not yet. It hovered between us, just beneath the surface of every cough he tried to hide. "I did something," he said, not looking at me. I waited. He never rushed when it mattered. "I met with Walter," he continued, "the lawyer." Still, I waited. "Everything is in your name now. All of it. The accounts, the house, the investments, even the business shares." I blinked. He finally turned toward me. "I didn't want you left begging." "I wouldn't." He raised a hand. "You'd never beg. That's why I did it." The next week, I signed papers, quiet ones, private. Walter brought them over in a manila folder. Greg watched from his chair, his fingers too thin already, his breath shallow, but his eyes were steady. "No one needs to know unless you want them to," Walter had said. And I hadn't. Not then. Because I still believed Mark would remember who I was, that he'd step up, honor the man who raised him, see me not just as Mom, but as the woman who taught him how to tie his shoes, his tie, his pride to something deeper than money. But now, years later, I was a freeloader, wallpaper. And they didn't know. They didn't know that the house Mark grew up in, the one they assumed was theirs by sentiment, by inheritance, by sheer entitlement, was still mine. They didn't know that Greg's investments, carefully curated across 30 years of sacrifice and modesty, had matured into $7 million. 7. Not 4, not 5. 7. Walter had made sure of it. Every year, he sent an updated portfolio with a soft note. All in your name. Fully protected. I kept it in a locked drawer beneath my old letters, alongside Greg's funeral program and Mark's kindergarten drawings. The last time Mark and I spoke about money, he was 27. He said, "If anything ever happens, you'll be okay, right?" I said yes. He never asked again. He assumed. And assumptions, like weeds, take over when no one tends the truth. After the dinner party, after freeloader echoed through my ears like a nursery rhyme, I pulled the folder from its place, sat at my little desk, ran my fingers along the paper. The ink hadn't faded. My name, full and legal, was there on every line. I didn't cry. Not even when I thought of Greg, who had done all this in silence, who had known, somehow, that love alone wouldn't protect me from being forgotten. That sentiment dies faster than ownership. That mother becomes burden when no title backs it. I looked around the room, at the chipped dresser, the lamp that flickered when it rained, the corner where I kept my bag packed, just in case. And I thought, they believe I have nowhere to go, that I am staying because I must, that their crumbs are my feast. But I have $7 million and a deed they don't even know exists. And I don't need them to know. Not yet, because silence has always been my armor, and they have mistaken it for surrender. Let them. Let them think I'm powerless. That's what makes power so satisfying when it finally speaks. Not in rage, not in fire, but in motion. In one, simple, irreversible action. And that moment, the moment when I decide to move, will be mine alone. They seated me next to the bar, not by the family table, not near the head, just far enough away that I wouldn't be visible in any photos unless someone leaned back too far. The place card said, Edith M. No mother of the groom, no title, no role. The florist had draped garlands across the arch. The napkins were folded into perfect triangles. And the chairs, they had ribbons tied around each one except mine. It wasn't malicious. It was meticulous. Someone had thought about it, planned it, made sure I'd be just there. The wedding coordinator offered me water, smiled too brightly. She didn't know who I was, just another old woman in soft shoes and pearls. I nodded politely. The ceremony started at 3. The sun was too bright for May, and the guests squinted from their seats on the lawn, all designer sunglasses and perfume. I kept my hands folded in my lap. Mark stood at the altar, clean-shaven, tall, looking more like Greg than ever. He didn't look my way. Not once. The music started. She walked down the aisle. Everyone turned. I stood with them. She looked beautiful, I'll admit it. Not because of the dress or the hair or the bouquet, because she believed it all meant something. Maybe it did to her. They exchanged vows, laughed, kissed before the officiant finished speaking. People clapped. And I didn't. Not because I didn't wish them well, but because I was no longer part of the story. Afterward, guests drifted to the reception tent. Waiters passed hors d'oeuvres on silver trays. Mark's old college roommate gave a toast about loyalty. Her sister gave one about destiny. Even the family dog got a mention in someone's speech. But no one handed me the microphone. I wasn't surprised. But still, I had prepared something. 2 minutes. Short. Soft. A story about how, when Mark was 6, he once wrapped a rock in aluminum foil and told me it was a diamond because you're my sparkle. I wanted to tell that room. This man, this groom, once believed love could be made with his own hands. But the mic never came. I watched the DJ tap it. Anyone else want to share something? Pause. Her mother stood. A few friends chuckled. The bartender said something too loud. I stayed seated. I reached into my handbag and touched the folded paper. 4 times folded. Once in hope. Twice in dignity. The last time in finality. I didn't unfold it. Just held it in my hand while they danced. They played a song from her playlist. She sang along. Mark mouthed the words. They looked like a commercial. I sat in the shadows, smiled when appropriate, clapped when the cake was cut, ate a small corner piece, lemon, too sweet. When the photographer called for family portraits, I wasn't on the list. I saw it, typed and printed. They were checking names. I approached. "Excuse me, I think—" The woman glanced up. "Sorry, we're on a schedule. We've got the grandparents already." "I'm his mother." She blinked. "Oh, 1 second." Then turned away. I didn't wait. I went back to my chair, poured myself a glass of water, and sipped slowly. Mark never noticed. When the music slowed and couples danced, I gathered my things. Quietly. No fuss. She saw me leaving. "You're heading out?" she asked, like a polite neighbor. "Yes," I said. "Well, thank you for being part of it." Part of it, like a borrowed dish, a placeholder. I nodded, didn't hug her, didn't ask for a photo, didn't say, "You're welcome." Just walked to the parking lot. The evening air was cooler, my shoes pinched. The grass had stained the hem of my dress. I didn't mind. I sat in the car for a while before starting it, looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. Still me, still whole. And in my purse, next to the lipstick I never reapplied, the folded paper stayed untouched. That was the last time I wrote something for Mark. Not because I ran out of words, but because I finally understood. He wasn't listening. The day after the wedding, I washed every dish in the sink. They'd hosted brunch that morning for out-of-town guests, the kind with pearls and loud opinions. I wasn't invited to sit. I wasn't asked to serve. But when the last mimosa glass clinked into the basin, I stepped forward, as I always had, and began to clean. No one said thank you. By late afternoon, the house was quiet. The leftover balloons had wilted, and the hydrangeas were starting to sag in their vases. I moved through the kitchen like a ghost, wiping counters that were already clean, folding towels that weren't mine. Mark came in around 6. No tie, shirt untucked, a new ring catching the light as he rubbed the back of his neck. He stood there for a moment, like he was waiting for something, maybe gratitude, maybe permission. I didn't speak first. I knew better by then. "She's really happy," he said, finally, meaning his wife. I nodded. He poured himself a drink, tapped the ice with his finger. Didn't look at me. "I think," he said, "it's time we talked about next steps." I waited. He took a sip, cleared his throat. "I mean, with the living arrangement?" I said nothing. "It's just—" He looked at the ceiling. "You've been here a while, and things are different now." Still, I said nothing. "She and I, we need space, to grow as a couple." He didn't say the word leave. He didn't have to. He called it transition, called me family. In the same breath, he suggested I start looking elsewhere. "Of course," he added, "we're happy to help with the process. Find something comfortable. Like a nursing home." He didn't say it, but I heard it. I looked at him then. Really looked. This boy I raised. This man who now stood before me, rehearsed and detached, speaking in the language of polite rejection. "You want me to go?" I said. He flinched, just a flicker. Then, recovering, he smiled, soft, condescending. "It's not like that." "How is it then?" "It's healthy boundaries." I laughed, quietly, not cruelly. "I'm not angry, Mark." He looked surprised. "I'm not staying," I said. "Don't worry." A beat passed. 2. "You're not?" "No." He blinked, like he'd expected resistance, a scene, a plea. But I was past all that. He offered a tight nod. Relief, maybe. I walked to the sink, emptied the last of the tea down the drain, rinsed the cup, dried it, set it in its place. "I'll give you a timeline soon," I said. "Sure," he said. "Yeah, take your time." I didn't look at him again. I descended the stairs to the basement one last time with a strange kind of calm in my chest. Not sadness, not even bitterness, just clarity. Because in that moment, I realized something I should have seen long ago. He didn't ask me to stay out of love. He never had. He asked me because it was convenient, because I folded towels and packed lunches and never interrupted, because I was low cost, low volume, low maintenance. But now I was in the way, and that meant it was time. Time to do what Greg always said I'd need to do someday. Time to remember who I was before motherhood swallowed me whole. Time to move, quietly, entirely, and on my terms. So I opened my closet, took out the small suitcase I hadn't used in years, and began to pack. Walter still lived in the same house, white shutters, crooked mailbox, a wind chime that never hung straight. I hadn't been there in over a decade, but everything was exactly as Greg had described it the last time they spoke. Nothing special but mine. I rang the bell at 9:59 a.m. My hand didn't shake. The door opened before the second chime. Walter looked older, not frail, just slower. The kind of aging men accept better than women. His sweater had a stain on the sleeve, and his glasses were perched halfway down his nose. "Edith," he said. "I was wondering when you'd come." We didn't hug. We never had. But he stepped aside like the threshold still meant something. The house smelled of old books and boiled coffee. I followed him to the back office. Same worn carpet, same ticking clock. He gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Sit," he said. "Tea?" "No, just this." I opened my bag and pulled out the envelope. He didn't touch it right away, just looked at me with those tired, sharp eyes. "So," he said, "it's time?" I nodded. He opened the envelope, unfolded the documents like scripture, read them line by line, didn't skip. I waited, quietly, my hands in my lap. When he finished, he sat back, exhaled. Well, he said, it's all still solid. Your name, every asset, every clause. He did it right. Of course he did, I said softly. He nodded. You want to sell? Yes. Now? Immediately. He didn't blink. Any complications I should know about? They don't know, I said. They think they do, but they don't. He raised an eyebrow. Does Mark think he'll inherit? I smiled without warmth. He thinks I already did. Quietly. Years ago. But you didn't? I never touched a dime. Walter sat with that. Then he reached into a drawer and pulled out a yellow legal pad. I'll draft the protections, he said. Power of sale, independent counsel, everything clean. I nodded. You'll need a realtor. I have one in mind. Discreet? She's the daughter of a woman I used to work with. Sharp, no gossip. He scribbled something down. I'll need a few days. I'll wait. He looked up. You're not angry, he said. Not a question. No, I answered. Just ready. He nodded again, like he understood what that meant. You know, he said, Greg made me promise. If you ever needed anything, I was to act quickly, without questions. He knew I'd stay quiet too long. He knew you'd stay decent. I didn't reply, because decency only matters when people recognize it. When they don't, it becomes weight. We finished the paperwork. He slid it into a new folder. You have a place to go? He asked. Not yet. You will. I stood, picked up my bag, paused. Thank you. He waved it off. I'm not doing you a favor, Edith. You're just reclaiming what was already yours. That night, I sat at the small desk in my basement room and wrote a list. Not tasks, not logistics. A list of things I would no longer do. I would no longer fold towels I didn't use. I would no longer knock before entering rooms I paid for. I would no longer wait for permission to exist. The next morning, I called Jessica Tran. She picked up on the third ring. Jessica, it's Edith Collins. I'd like to talk about a listing. She didn't ask what kind. She just said, of course. When can you meet? I looked around at the 4 beige walls that had boxed me in for too long. Today, I said, if you have time. And I didn't even flinch when she answered, I'll make time. Jessica met me outside the house at 3 p.m. Sharp. My house. Still mine. I hadn't seen it in nearly 8 years. The paint was faded now, the shutters crooked. The garden was overgrown. Lavender pushing through weeds, the rosemary reaching for the sun like it still remembered me. Jessica was waiting in a navy blazer, clipboard in hand. She looked surprised to see me come alone. You sure you don't want to go in first? She asked gently. I shook my head. I know every inch. I don't need to be reminded. She nodded, no questions. I walked the perimeter, she said. Structurally, it's solid. Kitchen's dated, backyard needs clearing, but it's got soul. She paused. You'll get offers, fast. Good. No open houses, right? No. She made a note. Private showings only. Verified buyers. No signs out front. Exactly. She handed me a folder. The authorization. The listing agreement. A few standard disclosures. I read every word. Not because I didn't trust her, but because it mattered. This wasn't just paperwork. This was reclamation. She waited while I signed. Page after page, each one a nail sealing something shut. She passed me a pen. My hand didn't shake. When I finished, she placed her hand gently over the stack. You'll get offers within a day, maybe hours. I know, She hesitated. Do they know? I looked at her. Jessica wasn't prying. She wasn't gossiping. Just a question from someone who had once sat on the library floor at my feet, learning how to sound out perseverance. They don't know anything, I said. She nodded once. Then I'll be careful. I handed her the keys. Not the original set, the copy I kept in a velvet pouch, tucked between old coins and quiet memories. She took them like they were made of glass. I'll call as soon as I have something. I didn't reply, just turned and walked down the driveway. The sun was warm on my neck. The gravel crunched beneath shoes I hadn't worn in years. I didn't look back. That night, I stayed in a motel near the edge of town. Nothing fancy, just a clean bed, thick curtains, and a kettle. I made myself tea, mint, Greg's favourite, and sat on the edge of the bed, watching the shadows settle across the room like old friends returning. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel sad. I felt right. The sale wasn't revenge. It was truth. It was the quiet declaration that I wasn't waiting anymore. Not for love, not for recognition, just for the right moment to stop asking and start acting. The next morning at 8:14 a.m., Jessica's listing went live. By 10:00, her phone was buzzing. By noon, 3 buyers had asked for private showings. By 4, we had offers, 1 in cash, 1 over asking. One from a woman named Diane, who wrote a letter with her offer saying, I'm looking for somewhere to start again. I need a house that still remembers how to hold people. I read that line 3 times, then told Jessica, sell it to her. Not for the money, but because she understood what homes are for. By sunset, the paperwork was done. I signed one last time. Jessica sent me a copy of the transfer. I stared at it. My name. Her name. No trace of Mark. No trace of their control. Just a clean, irrevocable line. The house no longer belonged to me, but more importantly, it no longer belonged to them. The first call came at 6:17 a.m. I was still in bed, the motel room quiet, curtains drawn. The phone buzzed once, twice, then fell silent. Mark. I didn't answer. By the time I finished my tea, there were 4 missed calls. Then came the text. Mum, what's going on? Call me. I didn't. At 9:03 a.m., Jessica texted me. Your son called my office, pretended to be the owner, said he didn't authorize the listing. I replied, let him call. All documents are filed. All rights were mine to transfer. She wrote back 1 line. Handled. He won't call again, but he did. 10 times that day. No voicemails, no apologies. Just missed call after missed call. I placed the phone face down on the motel nightstand. At 8:42 p.m., it rang again. I let it buzz. This time, he left a message. Mum, what are you doing? You can't just sell the house. We live here. Are you losing your mind? This isn't funny. That word. We. As if his residency made it his. As if my silence had implied permission. But silence is not consent. It's just the space before the storm. I slept well that night, better than I had in months. The next morning, the legal courier delivered the official transfer documents to their door. Alongside it, a notice. 7 days to vacate. No loopholes, no extensions. Ownership had changed, effective immediately. It didn't come from Mom, it came from E.M. Collins. I imagined him standing at the door, envelope in hand, reading each line like it might correct itself if he squinted hard enough. But it wouldn't, because I had made sure of that. At noon, Walter called to confirm delivery. She sounded panicked, he said dryly. He said nothing at all. That tracks, I replied. By dinner, the calls had reached 24. I didn't pick up, because the time for words was over. Instead, I wrote a letter. Not long, not cruel, just final. Mark, I don't hate you, but I'm done begging for space in a life I built. You believed I had nowhere to go, that I stayed because I needed. But I stayed because I loved. And when love is met with entitlement, it becomes burden. You made me a burden. You called me a freeloader, even if not in those words. You erased me from your life, one rule, one joke, one oversight at a time. You did not notice when I vanished. Now you are simply noticing the absence. The house was mine. Always was. Your father made sure of that. I didn't take anything from you. I only reclaimed what was never yours to begin with. You have 7 days. I suggest you start packing. E.M. Collins. I mailed the letter. Certified. No text. No email. No conversation. Because sometimes when someone has refused to hear your voice for too long, you stop using it and let the silence do the speaking. The building was nothing special. A small corner unit on a quiet street with peeling paint around the windows and a rusted mailbox that leaned too far to the left. The kind of place no one noticed unless they needed something. I liked that. It reminded me of myself. The real estate agent was young, eager. She wore sneakers with her blazer and kept checking her phone like someone might rescue her from the showing. It's been vacant for a while, she said, unlocking the door. Needs work, but it's zoned commercial. You could do anything with it. Anything. The word hung in the air like a dare. Inside, the floors creaked. The walls smelled faintly of mildew and forgotten air. A single window let in a triangle of light that fell across the dust like a spotlight. I walked the perimeter slowly, placed my hand on the wall, listened to the silence. How much? I asked. She quoted a number. Modest. Fair. I didn't haggle. I'll take it, I said. She blinked. You want to sign today? Yes. By the end of the afternoon, I had keys in my pocket and a lease in my bag. I stood outside on the sidewalk and watched as the sun dipped behind the rooftops, casting everything in a gentle gold. It wasn't grand. It wasn't impressive. But it was mine. Not a home. A beginning. I went inside, opened the back window to let the air breathe again, and then I sat on the floor. Just me. A small notebook, and the knowledge that I was no longer waiting to be seen. I was building something for the women who'd also vanished. Not a shelter, a structure, a place for women like me, discarded mothers, overlooked grandmothers, forgotten wives, who had been reduced to shadows and needed a place to come back into form. I made a list, not of what I needed, of what they would: legal aid, financial consultation, a table for tea, a place to sit and not be asked what they had done to deserve the silence they lived in. I would start small. A lawyer, a social worker, a few pamphlets, maybe a website. No slogans, no branding, just truth. The money was there. Enough to build something real, lasting, quiet. I didn't want applause. I wanted usefulness. I called Walter the next morning. I need to start a foundation, I said. He didn't ask why, just said, I'll come by Tuesday with the forms. Then I called Jessica. Know any accountants who work quietly? She did. By Friday, I had a meeting with someone who didn't blink when I said, this is for women who were told they were too much or not enough, who were erased, who are done apologizing. He nodded. We'll structure it like a trust. Keep it separate. Protected. I smiled. Good. The sign on the door was still blank, the windows still smudged. But every morning I came early, swept, opened the curtains. Let light in. Some days I just sat. Sometimes I wrote. One day I opened a drawer in my bag and placed inside a small tin of mints, a pen. A folded letter from a woman I met once in a waiting room who said, "I don't speak to my children anymore. They said I overstayed." Imagine that. I imagined it. I lived it. And I was done imagining. I was acting. Not out of anger, out of memory and purpose. They had called me a burden, but they had no idea what I could carry. He came alone, no warning, no appointment. Just appeared one afternoon at the entrance of the office I'd rented. The sign above the door was still blank, but the windows were clean, and the curtains were drawn open wide. He stood outside for a while before knocking. I watched him through the glass. He looked older, not by years, by weight. His shoulders sloped differently. His eyes were the eyes of a man who had run out of answers. I opened the door, but didn't step aside. "Hi," he said, voice low. I said nothing. I didn't know where else to go. Still, I waited. He glanced around the room behind me, the simple table, the chairs, the box of office supplies I hadn't unpacked yet. "This is yours?" he asked. I nodded. He looked down at his hands. They were shaking. I messed up. I raised one eyebrow. That was all. He took a breath. "She's gone," he said. "My wife. Took the boy. Said she couldn't trust someone who couldn't even protect his own house." He looked up at me. "Do you hate me?" I stepped back and let him inside. Not because I forgave, but because sometimes silence needs a room to echo in. He sat in the nearest chair like someone being punished. "I didn't know how much you carried," he said. "I didn't ask. I just assumed that I would stay," I finished. He nodded. His eyes welled, but he didn't cry. "I just wanted space, and I took everything instead." I didn't speak. Not yet. He looked around again, noticed the forms on the desk, the blueprint sketched in pencil. A single word written at the top. Hold. "Is this what you're building?" "Yes," I said. "For other women like you?" "No," I corrected. "For women no one saw coming." He let out a breath that sounded like grief. "I didn't think you'd really do it," he whispered. "You never thought of me as someone who could." He didn't argue. "I was proud of you once," I said softly. "When you tied your shoes. When you passed math. When you made me a clay ashtray in first grade, even though I never smoked." He looked up. "I stopped being proud," I continued, "the day you watched someone call me a freeloader and said nothing." He flinched. I didn't know what to say. "You still don't." He looked down at his hands again. "I lost everything," he said. "No," I corrected. "You gave everything away." A long pause, then quietly. "Can you help me?" "No," I said, "because this place, this work, isn't built on guilt." He closed his eyes, nodded. "I understand." I stood, walked to the desk, took a sheet of paper and placed it in front of him, blank. "Fill that," I said, not with apologies, with actions, with choices. He stared at the paper like it was a confession. Then he looked up. "I don't want to become you." "You couldn't if you tried," I said. "You were given more than I ever had, and still managed to leave a woman with nothing but silence." He winced. "But I'm not you," I said. "And I'm not here to hurt you." Another long pause. "Why did you do it?" he asked. "The sale?" He nodded. "Because I had something you forgot I had." "What?" "Agency." He blinked. "And memory." Then I picked up my bag. "I have to go," I said. "There's a woman waiting down the block. Her daughter pushed her out after 20 years of helping raise her children. She needs forms signed." He stood too, a little slower. "Can I help?" I looked at him for a moment. Then, "Not yet." "Will I ever be able to?" That's up to you. He reached for the doorknob, paused. I'm sorry. I know. He left without another word, and I locked the door behind him with hands that no longer trembled. The porch creaked under my feet as I stepped outside with a cup of mint tea, the same kind Greg used to make on stormy nights. The sun was folding into evening, laying soft gold across the sidewalk and warming the chipped railings. Inside, the women talked quietly, laughter rising now and then, low and real. There were 4 of them now, 2 from out of state, 1 from 3 blocks over, and another who hadn't spoken to her only daughter in 11 years. None of them were guests. None of them were burdens. Each had signed her own name on the form. We called it the holding room, not because it was a shelter, but because it was the first place we were allowed to hold our stories without apology. Miss Gilder brought her crocheting. Elaine played the old piano in the corner every afternoon at 2. A woman named Ruth read aloud from the newspaper, correcting grammar with a wink. They all knew why they were here. Not in detail, just enough to understand each other's quiet. It wasn't revenge. It was refuge. I moved slower these days, my hands stiffer, my back less forgiving, but I stood taller than I had in years. We cooked together, not out of obligation, but rhythm. Someone always made soup. Someone else remembered the sugar. We didn't keep score. That was the point. On Thursdays, I brewed the tea, read letters out loud from women who had mailed in stories. One wrote, "My son calls me once a year on his wife's birthday. I always pretend it's enough." Another wrote, "They said I could stay if I promised not to talk about politics or pain." We framed their words and hung them on the wall. It became a gallery of grief and grace. One afternoon, a young woman knocked, too young to stay, but she had questions. "Why don't they just leave?" she asked. I answered gently. "Because leaving costs more than money. It costs memory and patience and the belief that you're worth something even when no one tells you anymore." She stayed for tea, asked if she could come back. We said yes, because we remember what it's like to be erased. We remember the sound of drawers closing on our belongings, the silence after someone calls you ungrateful, the weight of swallowing one insult too many. But we also remember how to rebuild, with cracked cups, with untended gardens, with stories whispered over warm bread. One night, I stood by the window and watched the lights across the street flicker on. Someone had left a casserole on our doorstep. No note, just kindness. I thought of Mark, of the woman he once married, of the house they left behind. I wondered if he had learned. I hoped he had. But it wasn't my burden anymore. The women inside needed me more than he ever did. We had plans now, legal workshops, grief circles, a tiny herb garden on the roof, a place where no one asks what you did to deserve help, only what you need. That's all we ever wanted. To be asked, not judged. To be seen, not handled. To be useful, even in rest. This wasn't a revolution. It was a return. To self. To voice. To value. As the sky turned lavender, I finished my tea and set the empty cup beside me. Then I whispered what I wish someone had said to me long before the silence ever started. You are not a burden. You are not forgotten. And if no one else will hold your story, we will. Here, we remember out loud. So if this felt like your life, if your daughter-in-law ever sighed when you walked in the room, or your son looked through you like furniture, or you gave without counting until someone finally asked, "What have you ever done for us?" Then listen closely. We don't scream here. We don't beg. We document. And if you've made it this far, maybe it's time you did too. Subscribe to Grandma's Untold Stories, where silence is not surrender. It's just the moment before a woman remembers who she is.